Hello everybody, my name is Cecilia Barros and I'm a provisional psychologist under the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency in Australia. And today we're going to be talking about what are the differences between a general psychologist, endorsed psychologist, who are endorsed psychologists, and what is the two-tier Medicare rebate system. And we're going to look into the different jobs that you can get as general psychologist versus endorsed psychologist. So let's go. So a general psychologist would have done a minimum of 6 years of university, as we spoke about in our last video. So that's either the 4+2 or the 5+1. Now, an endorsed psychologist would have done a minimum of 8 years. So this would have been your undergraduate, your honors or a postgraduate diploma, then your master's, and then you need to do the 2 years of supervision afterwards. So for you to become a endorsed psychologist, you would have needed to do all that, which is a minimum of 8 years, versus a general psychologist where you've done 6 years. Does that make sense? That's just the basic outline of it. What is the two-tier Medicare rebate system? That is the main reason why there is a difference in clinical psychologists and other types of psychology in Australia. Now, we will talk about the issues that come with that, but first I'm just going to look into the two-tier system. So the two-tier system is that clinical psychologists get a $124 Medicare rebate for their clients. So if you would charge $200, then your clients would get $124 back. So then they would only pay a gap of $80 or about, I'm not going to do the math. On the other hand, general psychologists or other types of psychologists like forensic psychologists, counseling psychologists, health psychologists can only get $84 back for their clients. So if they charge $200, the clients will have to pay a gap of $120. And so that is where that disparity comes from. Now, I'm going to go a little bit into the problems that the Medicare rebate system has done for psychologists in Australia. I am not saying that clinical psychologists are bad, and I'm not saying that I don't like clinical psychologists. I think all psychologists are wonderful, but the system makes it really hard so that other psychologists that aren't clinical can get more recognition and they can be accepted, and just seeing that their work is just as important as any other field. So, first of all, clinical psychologists are seen in the Medicare rebate system. Yes, it's a lot better than other types of psychologists. This is seen clearly by the two-tier system. It makes it really difficult for forensic psychologists, health psychologists, counseling psychologists, sports and science psychologists to be able to help out the community as much. And it actually loses the psychologist's interest into staying in the field. Even if you might be really interested in health psychology, you might be turned off by going into that area because you won't be recognized as much as clinical psychologists. And that is where the problem is coming from. There's been a huge decrease in master's programs in psychology that are not clinical psychology. So for example, there used to be a lot of universities that in 2017 that did forensic psychology. Ever since this two-tier system has been reinforced, it's actually decreased. And in 2019, there was only one university that did forensic psychology. So this has really affected how universities can provide for their students and how psychologists can go into that area feeling that they will succeed. And this has been further affected by the fact that clinical psychology degrees will now be decreasing in cost by 40%, while other psychology courses won't be. This is a huge problem because we need forensic psychologists. We need them to work in our prisons. We need health psychologists in hospitals. We need education developmental psychologists that can really help at schools and help students. We can't just have one type of psychology. It's not allowing psychologists and people that want to become certain types of psychologists other than clinical psychologists to get the voice and to be able to actually access the university and the degree that they want. This has been very difficult on a lot of psychologists, and it has really affected how even clients really do see psychologists. Now they're being told that only clinical psychologists can work on one thing or only this. It's not true. Any psychologist, they are all, first of all psychologists have a general registration, which means you can work in any area that you want. The difference is that your master's degree gets you to be more niche in one area. So I myself, once I become a general psychologist, I could go and work in a prison. There are many general psychologists that do. The difference is that a forensic psychologist, they really know how it works and it's their area. And that's the main difference. We shouldn't be creating this view that one type of psychologist is better than the other when all of us are working to help the community in every single way and in our own ways as well. So I hope that it makes you understand. I will be putting some links in the bottom explaining and some laws that are regarding this. The AAPI, which is the Australian Association for Psychologists Incorporated, have also written a letter and spoken about this topic many times. They are another organization other than the APS, which is the Australian Psychological Society. AAPI does focus a lot on these difficulties and these problems that have been affecting all other types of psychologists and not just clinical psychologists. And I'm not saying that clinical psychologists are bad. They aren't at all. They are wonderful, and I'm so proud that we have so many people going to that area. It just makes it really hard for other types of psychologists to thrive, or they aren't being viewed in the same way or in the way that they should. And lastly, now it's about the jobs. What jobs can you get as a general psychologist or a clinical psychologist or forensic psychologist or a health psychologist? Well, this does obviously depend on recruiters and what they would like, but in general, all psychologists can do each other's jobs. Now, it doesn't mean that I can, go and work in exercise sports science and be like, yeah, I'm an exercise psychologist. No, if you did not do a master's in sports exercise psychology, you are not a sports and exercise psychologist. You are a general psychologist that works in that area, or you are a clinical psychologist that works in that area. One big question that I always get asked is, what can general psychologists work in? Once I was told by university that if you are a general psychologist, you can only work in HR. That makes me really upset because it just shows the lack of understanding that some people have towards general psychs. Being a general psychologist just means that you don't have an area that you're niche in. You can have an area that you practice the most in, but it just means that you don't have a name in front of your psychologist. You can still do the assessments, you can still do the tests, you can still help your clients in the same ways. The big problem with saying that general psychologists can only work in HR is because HR, there is a bachelor's made for a Bachelor of Human Resources or a Master of Human Resources. They do not want psychologists there. That goes into the area of organizational psychology. So even saying that general psychologists work in HR is already false, and it's actually undermining the work that people that do Bachelors of Human Resources work on, and it's really undermining their work. So general psychologists, you can really work in any area that you want, but you need to remember that you do have a limit to your competence. You won't go and work in something that you really are not aware of and that you might have another psychologist that is better at it. But that's the same to any psychologist. If you are a clinical psychologist, you're going to work in a prison, you do not know more than a forensic psychologist. You will need to work under your area of competence, which is a part of our ethical guidelines. You need to be aware of the things that you know and the things that you don't know cause any harm to your clients. So how do we sum it up? If you're any type of psychologist, you can technically work in any type of psychology area, given that you've done a little bit of professional development and have shown that you're interested in that area and that you know your limits to competence. As a general psychologist, you can again work in any area, but it is limited to your level of competence. So just because you're a general psychologist doesn't mean you're not important or that you won't be able to do the work that you want to do. And just like if you go into an area and maybe you work there for a while and you want to change your area of endorsement. For example, you are a forensic psychologist and you want to become a clinical psychologist. They've actually started to begin doing bridging courses, which I will be talking about in the future, which is a 1-year bridging course so that you can just do that. You don't have to go through a thesis. It's a 1-year master's program that pretty much you can move from you can be endorsed in forensic psychology and clinical psychology as well. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to or if you don't have the money for it. You can really just work in that area as long as you show that you know what you're doing, and as long as you're aware of your area of competence. So I really hope that made sense. I really hope that this video gave some clarifications on what you can do as a psychologist, what is a two-tier medical rebate system, and why it can be really unfair on other psychologists, because in the end, we're all reaching for the same goal of trying to help our clients, you know, regardless of what you do in the field. So why not make it fair for everybody? So I just hope you have a great day, and I hope all your questions, or many of your questions, were answered. And I'll be putting a bunch of links in the resources below, so you can just check them out as well. Have a good day.